Hello, Mike Chigani, and this is Straight Talk. With me today is Professor Ben Cowling, epidemiologist at the Hong Kong University. Thank you. You've been here before. I think everybody notices that you're wearing a mask, and for the first time, I am as well. Is that what you suggest?
That's exactly what I suggest. I think whenever we're indoors with other people, we should all be wearing masks as much as we can.
Even though I'm sitting so far away from you and you're wearing a mask, I should be wearing one as well?
Yeah, I think that's the prudent thing to do. We know that COVID is spreading indoors, even to people who are not necessarily that close to each other, but spending a longer period of time. We're going to be here for about 30 minutes. That's potentially long enough. If one or either of us had COVID, that's potentially long enough that a transmission event could occur. So better be safe and wear a mask.
But you know, usually the hosts don't wear masks, and I had taken mine off, and then you asked me to put it back on, right? You think that's the prudent thing to do, right?
I think it's right now with the situation in Hong Kong, I think it's a good idea. Maybe a couple of months ago when we did the show before, It wasn't such a serious situation, so I understand that they'd like you not to wear a mask, but I think right now, better be safe, and we all wear masks as much as we can.
Now, Professor, it's a lot more serious, you said. The Chief Executive, Carrie Lam, actually said the situation is critical. And it seems like it's out of control, is it?
The measures that have just been put in place should start to show an effect maybe in the next few days or in a week or so. There is a delay between when you start to have some new measures and when they take actual effect, because there's all these lags in the whole process. When someone's infected, they don't show symptoms straight away. When they transmit onwards, the next person doesn't show symptoms straight away, and so on. So there's been stricter and stricter measures in the past week. I guess we're still going to have case numbers going up for a few more days, hopefully turning the corner in a week or so. If you remember back in the early days of COVID-19, case numbers were doubling every 5 to 7 days in Europe, in the US, elsewhere. In Hong Kong, we were doing much better because of the control measures. But right now, we've seen the case numbers, again, double in the space of about a week.
Remember, well, you know, we had on a couple of days back, we had over 100 cases in a day.
It was like a week ago, it was 30, 40 a day. Then it's been 100 cases a day. It's really risen up a lot. And if we were not to do any interventions, it would then be 200 a day, 400 a day after a week or 2 weeks. And they just keep going. But the measures in place now, working at home is really important. Preventing mass gatherings, really important. And I think that's gonna achieve a control. But the numbers are not going to go down to zero straight away. We'd expect still local cases to occur over the next few weeks, even the next month or more. So that's going to have implications for schools restarting later in August and September.
So you think that with the new measures, because now we've gone back to closing bars and karaoke lounges, and restaurants are closed from 6 p.m. onwards, and restaurants can only have 4 people at a table. And now, at first, there was compulsory mask wearing on public transport, but now it's compulsory mask wearing public indoors, right? You have to wear it as well. So you think those measures are going to be able to bring numbers down in about a week or two? Is that what you say?
At the end of March, we saw those group of measures, all those measures
These
put
are
together.
even tougher than then.
Even tougher, right. So even all those measures in March were able to bring the numbers back down again, but not straight away. It does take a while of the numbers coming down and down and down. I guess by the end of August, the numbers will come down to a low level, I guess. But people are a little bit tired of some of these measures, so they're not as enthusiastically compliant with the control measures as they were in March, when we were really concerned about what was then the first large peak.
Do you think that hopefully it will come down, but if it doesn't, Professor, if it doesn't come down, should mask wearing be compulsory, not just public indoors or public transport, but even outdoors? The minute you step out of your home, you've got to have a mask on. Should that happen?
I don't know if we need to go that far. We understand that most coronavirus transmission is occurring indoors. And for something like mask wearing, there's a lot of personal responsibility. If the government makes it mandatory, it's not that easy to enforce. I think it's better to encourage everybody to wear masks, make it easier for people to wear masks everywhere, maybe provide more masks from a public supply, and then encourage people and create an environment where everybody wants to wear masks all the time, rather than making it mandatory and then attempting to enforce that.
Well, on the mainland, they have total city lockdowns, right? If it gets worse in Hong Kong, should we have a city lockdown?
I hope it
When
doesn't.
we never reached that point.
I-
Some other places have in Europe on mainland China.
That's right.
But should we do that?
I hope we won't need to. I think we'll see the next week or so. If the numbers start to level off and then begin to come down, then we need to keep the same measures in place perhaps for another month. I hope that we won't need to go to a lockdown, because that would be really, really disruptive for everybody. And so far we've avoided that.
But if needed, if it was necessary, if you need to do it, would you object to that?
No, if it's necessary, I think we should do it, because in
Total
Hong Kong,
lockdown.
we've
city
shown
lockdown.
that we're able to stop COVID from spreading. And unlike some other parts of the world, particularly the US, we're able to achieve that success.
But if we cannot, should there be a total lockdown?
Yeah, I mean, I think we'll have to look at that, but I wouldn't do it now. I think we'll have to wait a little bit of time to see if the current measures can be enough.
What happened, Professor? I mean, as you said, you know, some weeks ago, things like they were normal. I mean, restaurants were open, people were going back to bars and stuff, and it was like out of nowhere, all of a sudden, this thing popped up. What went wrong?
We recognize that when people are going around normally, like in 2019, 2018, when a virus like COVID comes in, it has the chance to spread. We need to do the social distancing, mask wearing, other measures to stop it. And a month ago, we weren't doing that. We had mask use, but we didn't have a lot of social distancing. Offices were open, restaurants were busy, bars were busy. All those places where lots of people gather together were really busy. And then somehow the virus was able to come back into Hong Kong.
How?
It hadn't been here.
How?
I think there's two possibilities. So one possibility is in the coming in with the people that were exempt from the 14-day quarantine, particularly the aircrew and the maritime workers. Also, we have people coming from the north into Hong Kong. I don't think there's very much COVID in mainland China right now, so I don't think that would be the risk. But the maritime, aircrew, those groups, maybe a few introductions through those. And then the second possibility is because of leaking from home quarantine. So for example, if your family member comes back from overseas to Hong Kong, they can do a 14-day home quarantine. It's very strict. They have to stay at home. But if you're there as well, you could get infection from them during their home quarantine, and then you can go about your normal life and spread it to other people before anyone realizes it. So one of the things to think about in the future, perhaps when we get case numbers back down to zero, is how we're going to stop this from happening again. Maybe reducing those exemptions or eliminating the exemptions, and also thinking more seriously about the home quarantine policies, either some way of strengthening it to monitor all the family members, requiring that everybody in the home is quarantined, or making it mandatory to have out-of-home quarantine in a hotel or a special facility.
So now, you said that it spreads more when you're indoors for a long time in a small area. I mean, this room is very large, so it doesn't spread that easily, right? That's one thing. But then if I'm out walking, like I did over the weekend, I put on my face mask, I went down the elevator, I went through the shopping mall, and then I went outdoors, and I still kept on wearing my mask until I reached the waterfront, and there's a waterfront walk, and then I took it off. Is that safe?
I think it's very reasonable. It's very, very low risk. So what we understand
I'm
about COVID...
outdoors by the water.
Right.
There's a wind, breeze blowing.
The wind will help a lot. What we understand about COVID is that it spreads indoors in poorly ventilated areas when people have close contact with each other for a prolonged period of time. If you were in a crowd outdoors without a strong breeze, then maybe there'd be a risk there. But in general, there have been very few, I'm not really aware of any actually reports of transmission outdoors for COVID-19. I think all the cases that we know about where there's transmission that's documented has been indoor transmission.
So if I'm walking very briskly, very fast, and people are jogging or riding bikes next to me, and we pass each other, that's not a risk.
I say it's very low risk. I mean, I can't say it's zero risk, but I think it's very, very low risk. A much better thing to be doing than going to a bar, karaoke, restaurant, and spending a lot of time there with lots of other people.
Because
indoors.
if you don't go out, you know, you're going to go crazy staying at home, right?
Yeah, that's true. That's recognized as one of the consequences of lockdowns in Europe and the US, that people really suffer when they're forced to stay at home for long periods of time.
Well, you know, that happened on mainland China where people were literally forced to stay in. Entire towns were sealed off, and then they managed to control the situation that way. But Taiwan didn't do that, yet it is doing so well. What's the difference?
I think in Taiwan they did well to keep the virus out of the local community. So with the 14-day quarantines for people coming into Taiwan, that stopped it from really getting into the community. And then in the small number of occasions when it did start to spread in the community, they were very, very good at test and trace to get on top of the virus and stop it from spreading without needing these large-scale lockdowns.
So how did they manage? I mean, their population is far bigger than Hong Kong's population, yet they did so well. They've got a few deaths, I think a few hundred cases, and then we're now seeing 100 cases a day.
Well, Hong Kong's one of the most densely populated places in the world, much more densely populated than maybe Taipei. So I think the density and the number of interactions between people is really a big factor in the current situation in Hong Kong, that really COVID spreads easily when there are lots of people around, densely packed together, and that's exactly what's happening in Hong Kong. Whereas in Taiwan, maybe it's a little bit less dense, more spread out. A lot of the people live in lower density areas, in suburbs, even in the countryside, and there's not so much risk for COVID there.
All right, quick break, see you soon. Thanks for staying with us. This is Straight Up with me is Professor Ben Cowling from the University of Hong Kong, epidemiologist. Now, Professor, you know, when there was civil servants were staying at home and people were worried when we first had it, this coronavirus, then less people were going out, and then the mass transit railway then lowered its frequency of trains. Then that made trains even more crowded, right? And now you can see that trains are very crowded because the frequency is not as good. Is that a good idea?
I think on a short bus journey, on a short train journey, there's not much risk for the people on those journeys. But once it gets to a longer journey, if there's a lot of people packed together in a carriage, a train carriage or in a bus, that's when you might start to see transmission occurring. And ideally, you'd prefer less crowding in public transport, which means those trains or buses should run as frequently or even more frequently than they would otherwise do.
So you can space the people out,
Space the people out, have less people packed together, and so if there was a risk, it would be minimized.
Is it safer to be on an MTR? Because MTR train carriages are often very, very packed. Standing room only, especially during peak hours, and it's very packed. Is that safer than being on a bus where at least you're just sitting two people next to each other, or even on a double-decker, right? It's more spaced out. Which is safer?
It's a difficult question. I think the ventilation would also be a major consideration, and MTR trains are pretty well ventilated, but I'm sure there's an element of risk to all of those public transports. And so working at home, like the civil servants and now many private businesses are doing, would really help a lot, because if people spend more time at home, they're not on the public transport, they're not in the crowded areas. That's what's going to help to bring the case numbers down.
There are a couple of taxi drivers who've got it. Would you take a taxi now?
Again, I mean, a short journey is really very, very low risk, but a longer journey with the windows closed, I mean, there's an element of risk to it, but perhaps less than on a packed train or bus.
So if you were in a taxi and you ask the driver to lower the window, then the breeze comes through. That'll be a lot safer.
That'd be a
right?
very good idea.
Now tell me this, you know, suddenly this thing popped out of nowhere, right? We don't know how, and a lot of it is untraceable. Do you think there are a lot of people walking around Hong Kong with no symptoms?
I don't think there's a lot, because the tracing of cases is going backwards and forwards to try and identify how people were infected as well as who they might have already passed on infection to. And so we're able to fill in a lot of those gaps later. But it does concern me that every day when we hear about the number of cases, a lot of those we don't know how they got infected. They are unlinked with other cases. What we remember back to the first wave, there were definitely some unrecognized cases, but not a large number. I guess the same is true now. There are some unrecognized cases, but not a very large number.
So you don't think there's a whole bunch of people walking around with showing no symptoms?
I don't think so. And I don't think if there were, that would be a major concern. We know that people with symptoms tend to be a little bit more contagious than people without. Of course, there's still a risk, but I don't think it's a large number right now.
Now, tell me this. You mentioned about schools, whether we should, in September or August or whenever it is. I mean, kids already missed a lot of school time, and now it's summer. They'll have to go back sooner or later. There's this big debate about whether kids should go back to school, even if the virus is not contained. Like in the US, President Trump says he wants schools to reopen because not opening schools hurt the kids more, and kids are safer in that they don't catch it easily and they don't show much symptoms and they recover very quickly compared to older people.
Yeah.
Do you think that even if, for example, in September, we're still at this critical stage, that schools should close or should they open for the benefit of the kids?
I think for the benefit of the kids, particularly primary schools, can consider opening, but maybe with the half days as they were doing in June and early July.
Even if the virus is out of control like it is now?
Even if there's cases in the community, I think in Hong Kong we have more experience with school closures than in other parts of the world. We have, many families have helpers or grandparents around to help with the children. So school closures have less impact in Hong Kong than they would in the US, and I understand the arguments for reopening schools in the US. I think Hong Kong may be a little bit more cautious, particularly with the secondary schools, where children may be a little bit better at looking after themselves and learning by themselves. But primary schools, those kids have already missed much of the last 6 months. If they're going to miss another 6 months of schooling, it's going to have an impact.
It's going to hurt them, right?
It's going to hurt
so
them
you
in the
think
long
that the younger kids should go back? They also need company, right? I mean, kids need to play with other kids.
For their social, emotional well-being, and then of course there's school meals provided by schools for some children. A lot of different reasons why it's important for kids to get back to school. And then if their parents are working, they would like to send their children to school so that they can get back to work as well. So a lot of reasons to consider reopening schools, but also the factors against it, that if there was to be a school outbreak, it would really be bad for the community.
Now, we have this situation, we've seen it elsewhere as well, Professor, that the thing breaks out, you enforce all these tough measures like Hong Kong has done. We now have compulsory mask wearing in public areas, indoor areas, public transport. Then you've got social distancing, the bars are closed, the restaurants are half closed. And then, as you say, maybe in a couple of weeks it'll get better. Then you slowly reopen again because, otherwise the economy is just going to get hit really bad. And then it'll start again, and then you're going to impose all these things yet again. How is it going to end? Start, suppress. How does it end?
I mean, that's the concern that we're all aware of, that COVID is going to come back sooner or later. Hopefully we can now get the numbers back down to zero, I don't think in 2 weeks, but maybe in a month or so. At that point, we then need to hope to keep it out as long as possible so we can have a break before the next wave appears. And it will appear sooner or later.
Why do you say that? Why do you say it'll appear?
Because the virus will be back sooner or later. As we've seen now, it just needs one chance to come back in, and then it starts spreading. And if we're going back to normal life, later this year, it will have a chance to spread. So it will be back sooner or later. We can't keep it out indefinitely. In the long run, we're all hoping for a vaccine, but I don't know how soon that will be available.
Well, there's a big rush for it, and some experts have said that they hope it'll come at the end of the year. Is that going to be the game changer?
Sure, but in order to have enough doses for the whole world, and for Hong Kong, of course, that's going to take months and months of production. I don't think we're going to be first in the queue to get vaccines. We don't have local manufacturing capacity. So we're going to have to wait our turn to get vaccine doses even after there is an effective vaccine.
Should the government now start making orders? Because as you know, the US says that they've got one. They're actually already preparing to mass produce.
Yep.
And other countries, including India, are preparing to mass produce. And obviously it'll be for their populations first, right? But should the Hong Kong government now place orders? Because as you know, when this thing started, when the virus started, we had a rough time getting face masks, right? Because the whole world was trying to grab them.
Yep.
Should we now be ordering vaccines?
I think it would be a very good idea to order 1 million vaccines from one company, 1 million vaccines from another company, 1 million vaccines from another company, and then whichever one comes first, we've got the order in. And if some of the vaccines don't pan out, if some of the companies end up that they don't have an effective vaccine, then that's too bad. But
then we will have wasted money, but you think it's worth it?
It's a risk worth taking, because we would like to have the vaccine as soon as we can, because after we've started using the vaccine in the community, things can get back to normal.
Well, the thing is, like, I think Oxford, they're producing a vaccine, and already they're producing it, even though it's not been proven yet, right? They're still going through the third stage of testing. But they've ordered, they say, we don't mind putting in the money. The US has done the same thing. India has done the same thing. You think we should as well?
I think so. I mean, there's a risk for the company, but they think it's a risk worth taking, because if it does work out to be effective, and the preliminary indications are that it will be, then they've jumped ahead of the queue by having their vaccine available in larger doses, larger numbers. Would you take it? Sure.
I mean, even though it's produced so fast, fastest ever, you would still take it?
Yeah, sure.
Because some other professors and experts said they won't. They want to see how it works out first.
Wow. I mean, I think I'd be very happy to be one of the earliest people receiving a COVID vaccine. I think that's what we've all been waiting for. We hope the vaccine is going to be very effective. We recognize that some of these vaccines may be 50, 60, 70% effective, not 100% effective.
Better than nothing.
But it's still better than nothing. And the more people that get vaccinated, the better for the community, the quicker we can get back to normal.
So when you say normal, I just got a minute left. Air travel, international travel, that's not going to be normal anytime soon, right?
2 years, I guess.
2 years? You can't go anywhere for 2 years?
I guess so. Let's see. I mean, I think one of the problems will be people will be worried about getting COVID when they're overseas. Places like Hong Kong will still be keen to keep COVID out. So we'll still have this 14-day quarantine in place, I guess, for many, many more months, a year or more.
But then if there is a vaccine, surely, if you've taken the shot, then you can go to another country and say, look, I've taken the shot.
Yeah, but how quickly are we going to get enough doses for everybody? The first million are going to go to the elderly and the healthcare workers and the high-risk people, not you and me. And so it's going to be a longer period of time before everybody can get vaccinated.
Okay, well, in that case, nobody's going to be able to go on summer vacations. Well, not this year, but you think next year?
Let's see. I worry about that. Let's see.
So for the time being, stay home.
Yep.
Now, is this last question, is what we're facing now in Hong Kong really critical?
I think it's a critical time. The measures that have just been put in place in the last few days, we should start to see the effect of those in about a week. So we'll have to see. We'll still see the numbers coming up a little bit more this week, I guess, and then hopefully plateau and start to come down again.
All right. Okay, thanks. See you next time. Good evening.